Goedemorgen. Ah, much better. Like that. Perfect. Okay, so hi again. For those who have seen me in the session before, and hi to all the new joiners in our track about hybrid and Azure and designing hybrid environments with Azure. This is a session about securing your Azure hybrid environment. And we'll talk about a couple of things here. We will show you what are we as Microsoft making available to our customers to basically help them getting more secure using our cloud and using their on-premise systems as well, connecting those stuff together. So I will show you a couple of different things in that session. My name is Thomas Maurer. I joined recently Microsoft as a cloud advocate. I'm in an awesome team which does like our mission basically is to go out and show features and scenario-based solutions as well as create content. But another big part, and I highly encourage people to come to us and talk to us, is to get feedback for the engineering teams. We are directly in the engineering team itself. So we are like listen to feedback and go and say, okay, look, customers want this or need this to be successful. So we can directly go to our engineering teams. We have a couple of people from our team here. So if you want to talk to us, come to the booth, like the Microsoft booth where the Ask the Experts and the demo stations are. We are happy to talk to you. So just a quick reminder on that. I just also realized that this is my fourth presentation doing for Microsoft. And when I joined them, they gave me some like basic training again, for those who haven't been in my first session. So they told me basically I cannot bribe my audience with Swiss chocolate. So I got something new. Let me see if the clicker works or not. Oh, sorry about that. So I got something new, which is stickers. Not as good as Swiss chocolate, but I think they also like them. So if you want some stickers later on, just come up to me or come to our booth in the afternoon, and I'm sure I have a couple of stickers. I don't think I have stickers for all of you, but yeah, that's how it is. Perfect. So in this session, we will have, like, again, have a look at multiple things about the security story we have, especially in a hybrid environment together with Azure. So first, we will have a look at Azure Security Center and what we provide there. We will then talk a little bit about something which is very important about securing your administrative access to your Azure subscriptions and other Azure services. We will quickly jump into Azure Firewall, which we didn't have time to talk in the networking part. And then at the end, we will talk a little bit about Azure Update Management and how that can help you to make your environments more secure. That are basically the topics we're going to have a look at. And I will try to also do some nice demos so you can see how the things are going on. But before we go there, one thing is very important. So this is not something we say. This is something Gartner found out and said that through 2020, 95% of cloud security failures will be caused by the customers, right? It's not that the platforms are unsecure. It's basically like how you configure it. And this has multiple things to it. So first of all, security reasons are still one of the biggest concerns for customers to basically avoiding the public cloud. But a small percentage, and as mentioned, as it says, a small percentage of security incidents are basically caused by the cloud providers. It's not the cloud providers who make it unsecure or something like that. It's more about misconfiguration. And that's where we as Microsoft need to help our customers to basically implement better security as well. Because it's hard, right? I mean, even if you implement on-prem, I know how it is. There's a lot of things you need to think of. And a lot of things need to do, and so security is a really important part of that, and we definitely need to make it easier for customers to basically use security products and security features and make it easier for them to secure their environments. So that's very important, and I think that is what this session is all about, is enabling the customers to get more secure in a hybrid environment. So first of all, as you say, security is everyone's responsibility, and it's also a joint responsibility from us, Microsoft, as well as with our customers and partners. So first of all, we as Microsoft commit to build a secure foundation, meaning access to physical access to our data centers, right? that no one can just go in and take data out or something like that. Very simple, but we need to do it very effectively. And if you ever had the chance to visit one of the Azure data centers, if you're one of the lucky persons who had, they do tours, so that then you see how impressive the security actually is on those locations to access a data center like this. We also make sure that our data center operations are secure by default, right? There are a couple of things to it. So this can be updating the firmware and making sure that the driver levels and everything, like basically the data center infrastructure is secure, but also that our operations team or the people which are in the data centers are basically also doing their stuff in a secure manner. It's very hard, to be honest, for the people on site. They don't even know what's running on those servers. Like, it's basically impossible to find out for people on site to which customer or which service is running on a system. However, still, we need to have all the measurements in place and things like that to make sure that this is secure. And then, obviously, we build our cloud platform as to be as secure as possible. As Microsoft, we have many, many learnings. Like, we learn from our services like Xbox, Xbox Live, Windows. All those services, all that data we get from attackers, we use that to protect our own infrastructure, make sure that it's secure. And we also use, and I will show you that a little bit later on, we also use that data and give it to our customers, basically, to tell them, look, we know that this IP address, for example, is an attacker or something is going on. It accesses your services, something is not good there, and you can react on it. So where are we basically joining the responsibility? And I like that we talk about joint responsibility. We don't say it's the customer's responsibility. However, there you are basically a little bit in the driver's seat, right? So first of all, if you then deploy virtual machines and networks, the customer is basically responsible for keeping those virtual machines or operating systems up to date, to the patches, right? Is also responsible for making sure that the network configuration is set up the right way. He is also responsible for other apps like PaaS services that they're configured in a fashion which is secure. And then also that his data, for example, is encrypted, right? This is not something we can just all do by default. But what we can do is we can help the customer achieve this. And so we help you, again, tools like update management, Security Center are designed to basically help and make and work on those challenges together. The next thing we need to talk about is a little bit, security becomes a little bit a different approach in a hybrid cloud environment, right? There are a lot of challenges out there. We have with those systems, especially if we have legacy systems or classic systems on premises, and our cloud services, modern services in the cloud, and we need to take care of both. So one of the challenges in the cloud especially is this rapid change of resources, right? This is one of the advantages of the cloud, but also for security-wise, one of the challenges. So let me compare that. For example, if you deploy a server on-prem, you usually deployed the server, you went through, you configured it, you made it, secured it, made sure it's there, and then usually it runs for years, right? And you just update it and keep it up to date. But the security measurements, like configuring the firewalls and things like that, that's done, and you leave it there. However, the cloud is designed to just quickly deploy a couple of resources I need, use them, and then when I don't need them anymore, take them away, and deploy them, redeploy them again when I need them. So in that case, I cannot just spend hours in configuring something, and then the VMs get deleted, and then next time I need to again spend time on doing the protection. I really need to think about automation and setting that up. So all the time something is deployed, it's automatically protected, right? Things like that is very important. Then we are also getting more and more really difficult attacks. It's not anymore about just some script kiddies in the basement which run some tools to find some open ports and things like that. We really have, and I think there is an industry for that, an industry which just tries to get customers' data or basically hack customers and make sure they get their data and get their money, right? This is especially something if you talk to some of the risk officers and things like that. A lot of companies already set up wallets with Bitcoins. So in case they get hacked, they could pay basically the hackers off and make sure that things like this don't happen. So there is an industry for that. And also with like state-sponsored attacks, it becomes more and more difficult, right? And then, yeah, you're all here to learn about security, right? But still, there is not enough people who know about security, right? And like have the skill set to basically do it. And it's not something easy. And we all need people who, everyone is responsible for security, but those people are not easy to find, right? So those are some of the challenges we face today. So again, what are our most urgent cloud security configuration challenges we have? And we quickly have a look at those. And that's where we have a product to basically address it. And this product is called Azure Security Center. Who is familiar with Azure Security Center? Awesome. Couple of hands, that's good. Perfect. So it's designed when you go down and have a look at all the stuff it does, and it does a lot. We can nail it down to 3 big parts. So first of all, we want to strengthen your security, right? We want to make sure that you're more secure. We want to protect you against threats. And most importantly, we want to make it easier for you to get more secure in a faster way, right? That's very important. We don't want you to figure out, like, when you need to take like hours and hours to secure something. We want to be like more efficient and to do that. So those are the big things. So how does actually Azure Security Center report on? So what does happen there? So first of all, we have VMs and services running in the cloud, but also on-prem, let's say Linux and Windows servers. We have agents. We can grab the log files of those servers and systems, and they produce a good amount of data which we can basically use to find out what's going on. So what happens is the agents basically we can send that to a log analytics platform in Azure, and we can use that. We can also do a little bit of configuration on those, and we can, for example, export them to Excel or Power BI to get some reports, right? What we also have is a couple of other things. Next to this data, we also have data from the Azure platform, like from network configurations, PaaS services like SQL, storage logs and things like that, or services which create logs on storage accounts. So we can pump that in our security analytics tool, and then add our threat intelligence. So threat intelligence, I mentioned it before. We have a ton of services out there. Bing, Office 365, Xbox Live, which is like probably one of the services which is mostly attacked, at least depending on if you look at downtimes and things like that. So we take our learnings from there, and we basically use it and offering it to our customers. So if we know that we have a bot network attacking Xbox Live, basically Xbox Live, like we know that these computers are infected, and we have the IP address, and now those IP addresses are basically connecting suddenly to your services, we can tell you there is something not good happening, and we can warn you and take that intelligence and other things. This is just one small example to help you out there. With all that data then, this data is very useful, but we also need to show it and use it in the right way, and that's where Azure Security Center then comes in. It basically gives you a centralized dashboard where you can find all your workloads across subscriptions, even on-prem workloads, to get that data and visualize it. And then we give you recommendations to make that easier to discover what's going on, what should you fix. We give you also some prioritization, and I will show you that in a second. And then you can also have tools to investigate and do log search and things like that to see if something happened, how did it happen, and what can I do to fix that. And then obviously you have REST APIs, and you have automation and notifications which you can set up. So if something happens, you don't need to spend like watching at security centers 24/7. You can basically set that up to get all the information you need when you need them. So first of all, like, how do we extend your security or strengthen your security in that? So first of all, we give you a possibility to put down policies, right? You probably also heard about Azure policies, and they're now coming completely, like the security policies will be migrated to Azure policies, and we can say, okay, look, this is everything you need to do if you deploy a workload. There's a policy in place. The workload needs to be deployed that way. So we can do that and give you that. And we also give you some recommendations. So we can give you some policies which already have recommendations to that. And this state of all the services is not done like checked once, right? I deploy the workload, I check it, and then I forget it. And the next time someone opens a port or something, I don't care anymore. No, it's like continuously checked and check the configurations of those services. And as soon as something happens which it shouldn't, I get notified and I can take actions. So again, what you can do basically is having all the subscriptions in your Azure Security Center. So I can manage that from a single point, from a single interface. And I can then do policy management. And as you can see, if you're, for example, also familiar with management groups and subscriptions, you can then see a hierarchy of those policies assigned. And you can see where you need to take actions based on that. The next thing is, again, we really check continuously what's happening, right? Is everything right configured? And we have some recommendations to make. Now, one of the big problems we have is, like, I can give you a list of recommendations, but where do you start, right? Like, I will see that in my demo quickly. Where do I actually start, right? I have a list. What should I start with? There's so many things to do to secure my environment. So we created something called the Secure Score. And if you see it and I will show that in the demo, you do have a secure score, and you try to fix or go where you have the maximum of the secure store. And we then also give you recommendations and tell you, okay, if you do this, your secure score goes up by 25 points, right? And so you can prioritize what you should actually do with that. And then we give you not just recommendations, and we not just give you like, okay, you need to do this, or this is wrong. We also give you basically a recommendation to it as well. Good. So for example, you can see that like we have systems which is like, okay, which patches are not installed, by the way, for Linux and Windows again. And you can say, okay, which is a high risk, which update you should really install. And the other one is like, you should always install it, right? But there are ones which are really critical, which you need to take care of. Good. So let me quickly show you Azure Security Center. I'm super excited. It's a super awesome product. So this is, again, what is this? The Azure portal, right? I go down and I mapped Security Center here. I can drill into that. And I get some overview about different things here. And I want to quickly show you a couple of things. So first of all, let's go to coverage. And I can see here like the subscriptions I have in there. I can see the resources which are deployed in that, and where I have like owner rights and things like that. So I would see what I'm basically assessing and where I've configured those services. And you can also see I do not use the standard here for everyone, but like for most descriptions. Then we have the secure store. And first thing you can see here is that I did a really bad job in securing my environment here. This is not a really good score, so not even half of the points, well, a little bit more than half of the points, but that's what I can do. And I can see then here where, for example, do I need to do the much work, grouped by a category. Like I did a very bad job in data and storage. That's where I can improve a lot. But how do I now know what to do, right? How do I now know what to do? So for that, we have the recommendations pane. I can also, by the way, click in that UI. But here you have basically the recommendations of things I should do. And here you can also see the secure point, the points which I get by doing something. So one of the very simple things is basically enable multi-factor authentication for my owner accounts. This gives me plus 50 points. So this seems to be a very important task to do. So we can do that. We have other things, like let's say, for example, enable network security groups for virtual subnets. So I click on that. And what I get here is basically a description, what I need to do, right? Some general information and a step-by-step guide how to do it. That's fine, but for other services and for other things, like for example, I also have here one point which is install endpoint protection solution on virtual machines. So it detected that there is no endpoint protection running on my virtual machines. If I click on this, oh, that's interesting. It did not. Let's try again. Maybe just up. It's super interesting. Okay, let's try then with the install the vulnerability assessment solution. Usually it would show up and show me the VMs, all of them. I probably installed that, and that's probably what happened. So here I have something where I can directly take an action on, right? That's what I want to show you. So it does not just give me, okay, you need to do that. It also just gives me the option to do that. So I can go and click on the VM, and I can say, okay, install that on that VM. And then I can configure that the way I want it. And this happens with multiple services, not just with endpoint protection and other things. We try to make it easy so you can directly apply those things you need to do, and you don't need to go to like 100 steps of documentation to figure out what actually is needed. And then this is something which is in preview, and probably you haven't seen it yet. It showed up a couple of, I think, weeks ago for regulatory and compliance. So if we have a look at this, this checks basically policies and certifications against my Azure environment. So if I click, for example, for ISO, for that ISO certification, this is basically ISO mapped on technical resources in Azure. And this is something I see a lot when I speak to customers. They have this guy who is responsible for the ISO certification. They have the Azure admins and architects and things like that. But if they communicate to each other, the ISO guy doesn't understand technology, and the technology guy doesn't really understand what does he mean by having multiple accounts and things like that, or multiple access and things like that. So they don't speak necessarily the same language, right? And whoever probably did that in his company knows exactly what I'm talking about. So this gives you an overview about the different things in ISO. And you can see some of them are grayed out. You can then jump in, and those are things we cannot really do in Azure, where it's probably like personal stuff, which is like just an operations task or something, which is not really focused on technology. But if I go then, for example, in organization, I have here a point which is red. And then I can see, okay, under delegation and duties, I can then basically see that it says, okay, you only have one owner account. So what if that person is gone and you don't have access anymore or something like that? So make sure that this is going to happen, and gives me a recommendation to basically pass the ISO certification on my Azure environment, which I think is super cool if you ever dealt with things like this. And it's not just ISO, by the way. There's a lot more to it. Go back to the dashboard. Other certifications as well. Good. So this is a little bit about Azure Security Center. We will see it a little bit more in action in a moment. So the next thing is, again, as mentioned, we want to protect you from threats, right? We want to take sure that you don't get any malware and things like that, or like get brute force attacks and things like that. So we help you with our threat intelligence service to basically make sure that if something strange happens, or like you get attacked, you get a brute force attack, we'll basically see that and take necessary action and notify you that something like this is happening. We also have file integrity monitoring. So we protect like the Windows system files, Windows registry, and Linux files to see if there is any changes happening which shouldn't. You can also add your own files and see, okay, look, that file shouldn't change because that's my application. But if a hacker or someone is in my system and changes or modifies a file, then I can basically see that as well. I also can go and limit the attacks on my VMs. So by default, a long time, ports were open when you create the VM. A Windows VM RTP port was open. If it was a Linux VM, SSH was open, so you could access it from the cloud. And for hackers, it's probably easy to find all the IP addresses Azure is using, right? And then just do some port scans and see where I have VMs, and then run the brute force attack against that VM and figure that out. So this is something really important we need to do. And we need to protect our endpoints and make sure that they are only open the port when I really want to access it, right? So accessing the public port is not necessarily a bad thing, and sometimes it's required. However, I want to protect it when I'm not using it. And there's something called just-in-time VM access, which basically allows you to configure that, and we have a look at that at the moment. And then I have other things. I talked about the threat intelligence to figure out what's going on. Like, is there something happening which is not like usual activity? If I suddenly have, for example, logins to a VMs which are usually have like 2 logins a week, and suddenly I have 100 logins against that VM, and that user is then that user account is then going off and logging to other services from that VM. So this is something we can detect in our services and can basically tell you something is not right. Good. And then again, we give you features to basically implement that and discover new resources to get more secure faster. So for example, if you deploy new resources to your Azure subscriptions with Security Center enabled, guess what? It automatically detects those and takes it as a consideration in your Security Center as well. And it does not only work with Azure services, it also works with services you probably have extended from your on-prem network or from other cloud service providers as well. Good. The onboarding and integration seems to be very simple. So basically, on-premise, you basically install agents to do that. And then obviously, you can connect Azure services to that as well. So let's have a quick demo, as promised, about just-in-time access. Let me quickly switch back to the demo environment. And if I go here, for virtual machines, usually what you can do is you can go to a let's say, I do have a VM running. So I have this VM running here. And what I can do is I can click on connect. Got the RTP configuration. I can download the file and can connect, right? No magic to there. But that's not really secure. So that means the RTP port is open all the time. If I go to Security Center, I can go and just scroll down and say just-in-time VM access. So for that VM we just saw, or for the VMs we have, I can set this up. So I have the list of the VMs. I can click on that VM and say enable JIT. If I go there, I configure that. So this is like, these are the ports it recommends me to probably open if I want access to. Since this is a Windows VM, so I probably don't need the SSH port right now. So I put that out, and yeah, let's say, okay, I also want to be able to open PowerShell remoting ports next to RTP when I need it. I can then save that and basically configure it that way. I can also say how long a port should be available when I request access. So for example, if I as an admin request access for the VM, I can get like access for that VM for an hour. If I'm closing my connection, and open it up again after an hour or the next day, I cannot access it anymore, right? So I did that for a VM already. So this is my protected just-in-time access VM, and this would be available to be accessed over RTP. However, if I now do an RTP connection, it does not really work because the port is closed. So what I need to do to get access to that VM, I need to request it. I can see here, I configured here just the RTP port. So I want to say, okay, RTP port, open the RTP port for me from my IP address, from where I logged into the portal, which is very smart. When I'm on the road, I can basically use that. I can also just define an IP range when I know, for example, an office range or something like that, and can enter that one. And then I can configure and say, okay, the maximum is 3 hours I can do that. That's what I configured before. I just need it for like 1 hour, and then I can click open port. And then this will take a while, but this will open the port for that VM. I can then RTP, if that's done, I can RTP into it and access the VM. Very simple to protect. The good thing also, you can see if the access is, when was the last access, and who requested that access to, who did open that port. And it's very easy to go through and see what's going on there, or who did open the port, specific ports. Good. So that's about Security Center. One more thing we need to mention, but we don't really have time because it was to basically create all the content, and we also have 1 hour of content. But I feel that we need to mention it because it was announced at the RSA conference, I think last week. is Azure Sentinel. And Azure Sentinel basically does a couple of things and brings together all this capability, a lot of capabilities Security Center does, but it does it on a much, much higher level and gets from all different services, hardware and things like that, gets the information. So it collects information and data across different clouds, different on-prem systems, other cloud vendors, and it does that at a massive scale, right? Think about it, you can basically store all the logs you basically want, and we do that for you. Then it starts to detect what's going on. So if there are any threats and things like that, it gives you warning again. It investigates. It uses AI capabilities we built to figure out what's going on, right? What is actually going on? Is there, like we can see different patterns. What are the changes here? There's someone logging in from one VM to another, and he tries and he fails and things like that. We can see different patterns, and we can use our AI technology to find those suspicious activities. And then what we can do, we can then automatically respond and orchestrate and automate actions on this, right? So one action is simply notify someone, right? But then we can also know, okay, look, if, for example, that happens, we shut down that service, or we change a password, or whatever your action is on that, and we can immediately respond. So this is a very cool service. It's now in preview, by the way. So this is how it looks like if you log in. And just to show you what data sources you can use right now in the preview, you can have obviously different Azure services, but you can also use Office 365. You can also see competitor cloud services as well, on-premise firewall appliances, like that, and there the list goes on, right? So you can completely get all that data into Azure Sentinel and use it for your basically AI-supported security detection. Good. So what else can I do to basically secure my Azure environment? And how can I make sure that no one can hijack my subscriptions, right? So who in the room thinks that it's good to give everyone domain administrator rights? That's what I thought. No hand, that's very good, by the way. So the same thing applies to Azure subscriptions, right? Why would you give everyone owner rights to do things? I mean, that would mean they have full control all the time, and that's a problem. So that's what we don't do that on-prem for our resources. We also don't do that in the cloud, right? However, sometimes our admins, they need some certain higher level rights to do certain tasks. And that's where privileged identity management comes in. So for example, there's an example of doing that. So if we don't have that, everyone can just go and change the temperature in the room. Or basically, we can have a lock on that, and you can only access it if you really have the right rights at the right time. So first of all, it does basically just gives you just-in-time access to specific resources which you need to request, right? It does look at that certain policies are met, that for example, your account is using two-factor authentication. Only then you can basically get that right. And there's a couple of other things you can do around that, and you can then also assign then that to the specific RBAC rules in Azure. So again, we have a normal user account, and that's what I prefer. I don't want anything special or rights on my account. But I need to do a task where I need some admin rights for a specific task. So I go and request that. I then get the request, for example, approved, or I get that information. I have the rights for a certain amount of time. And then after that time is over, I basically get again my just user rights, right? That's how it should be. And this is also trackable. There can be approval steps to do that. So it's super flexible on that. So again, to sum that up a little bit, Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, it's just-in-time access, just enough access. There is a workflow which you need to go through if you want to, and it's also auditable. So that's basically Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, and I'm going to show you that in a quick demo. Important when you implement something like this, especially when everyone already had too many rights. You will not have just one way you go and you implement it and you're done. what you basically need to do is you need to do your research. You need to figure out, okay, who needs what rights at a specific level. You need then to create a design. You build that solution and implement it. Then you start using it. And then you get feedback that someone needs more rights or less rights or whatever. And then you need to do the research again and start the whole process again to basically just keep that in sync and make sure that everyone can do that. Okay, so give me a quick demo on privileged identity management. So here we are back in the Azure portal. We are under privileged identity management. And we can see here different roles. I'm going to scroll down and have a look at the password administrator role. So right now we don't have a member, but we want to be able that Don Funk, the user Don Funk or the admin Don Funk can basically go and do password administration. So we add Don Funk to that group, to that role, and say, okay. And now he is one of those people who can request that. So now we go in and configure that role and do the this workflow and see what we can do there. So we go back and go to settings of that role. And scroll down again to the password administrator role, and we modify that role, what we can do here. So we say, okay, how long, if it's activated, how long is it activated? We can go up to 72 hours or just let's say a half an hour if he enables that. We want to have a notification. He needs to have a ticket request. His account needs to have multi-factor if someone wants to do that. And he requires an approval. So I will add the admin, the prime admin as the approval account, right? So whenever Don Funk needs those rights, the prime admin first needs to approve it. I'm going to save that. And I'm going over here to the other desktop and log in as Don Funk with my username password as well as two-factor authentication. And because I need to now, as Don Funk, I need to change or administrate some of the passwords. So I need to request that role. So I see that I have the password administrator role, I have it there, but it's not active. So I click on activate. And then I need to fill it up. So I need to say, okay, I can only do a half an hour. I need to bring in a ticket number from a specific ticket system so the approver can see what's going on. I need to explain why I probably need to do that. And then I say send the request out. Now if I go back as the prime admin, I now got an approval request. Okay, Don Funk wants to have password administrator. I can then approve it. I don't deny it during the demo. It makes the demo much better. And then I can say, okay, approve. And now if I hit refresh here as Don Funk, and basically after a moment, I get the specific rights and now password administrator, right? And after half an hour, I lose that privilege, I lose that right. And if I'm not done, for example, I just need to do another request, or I'm done and the right is gone away from my account, right? So those are things, this is just a very small example of what you can do, but you can do that basically for all the RBAC or a lot of RBAC rules in Azure as well. Good. So next up, we talk about Azure Firewall. Right now, if you're building an Azure solution or something, oftentimes you need network virtual appliances, which are basically firewall appliances from third-party vendors, and that's great, right? However, today they're a little bit limited in terms of rate. That are basically VMs running, and they don't really scale really well. So the Azure Firewall service is a cloud-native firewall service, which is basically kind of like unlimited in terms of scaling. It scales very well. It's highly available designed. It's basically a service you just consume, a firewall service. There's also, by the way, just because I mentioned third parties, there's also third parties now can extend that service with different functionality as well. So what it does, it can do complete filtering of outbound and inbound rules. It works with spoke and spoke network traffic, but also if you use ExpressRoute or VPN, all the stuff we talked before. It also works with the virtual WAN we just also released, and works all with that together. So you can really control which traffic is allowed to which service. And We often get asked, what are the differences with NSGs, right? They also scale usually, but they're very simple and basic. So basically what you do with NSGs is you just open a port from a specific source and give it right to a specific destination on that port, right? So it's just a port mapping thing. It also does, Azure Firewall does also app filtering rules, which uses FQDN. So for example, we talked about this in the other session, when I want to block internet traffic for all the VMs, but I still rely on, for example, Microsoft Update, then I can just, with NSGs, I cannot say, okay, you can have everything in the internet except for Microsoft Update, because I never find the list of all the IP addresses of Microsoft Update, and also don't necessarily want to manage those. So I can basically do the filtering based on names, right? Name resolution. And then we have some other things. Also, we get a lot of integration into Azure Monitor, and we get the logs, what's happening as well. So with that, a quick demo here about Azure Firewall and what's going on here. We will use a jump server because the environment is obviously locked down using the Azure Firewall. So we create a jump server, and that's the server which is not protected by the Azure Firewall, which I will remote into, and from there I can then access my VMs, my workloads. You can see here our work servers. So let's go in the Azure portal, and let's create a new Azure Firewall container, if you will, or service. Let's see, to networking. And then we can here see we have a ton of networking solutions, also from third parties. We can say, okay, we're looking for a firewall. We then see the Azure Firewall service, and we create that. And for the creation process, fairly simple. We just give it a name, add a resource group, a location, right, for the firewall service, where it should be used. And then I attach one of the virtual networks I have, and also assign or create a new public IP address for that service. This will take a moment to deploy. That's where we take the magic of video editing to show you that. And I'm now going into that resource group. I scroll down to, for example, my firewall object. Go into the firewall object, and this is the firewall configuration or the firewall tool. So this is the private IP address the firewall appliance gets, right? That is very important when we set up the routing. So I copy that, I keep that in the best place, or the OneNote Notepad storage solution. And then I create a routing table, which I want now that everything basically from a specific virtual network is going to that firewall, right? I set up a routing table and say, okay, I want this, that everything from which goes out of that network goes through the Azure Firewall. So I go into that routing table, and I configure the subnets here. I associate the subnet from the specific virtual network I want to use. I say, okay, and then I have the subnet to choose, which are the workloads. Say okay. And now, when that's done, I define the root. So I say, give it the name. And then I do like everything again, which leaves the network, basically goes to a virtual appliance. And here, the storage solution comes again. And take that IP address. Copy paste it in. So everything gets basically sent to the Azure Firewall. Now, what's happening now is suddenly nothing outgoing will work anymore, right? Because the Azure Firewall, by default, everything there is closed. So all the traffic going out now to the network, to the internet or to other is not going to work. So what we need to do now is we need to configure the Azure Firewall to allow the things I want to. So I go into the firewall rules, and then you can see I have a couple of them. I have NAT rules, I have network rules, I have application rules. So first of all, let's set up an application rule. And what I want is, I want to give that VM access to GitHub, right? So I give that rule a name, give it a priority, and then I say allow GitHub for the target FQDN. I say all the VMs running in that specific subnet, allow HTTP and HTTPS to github.com, right? So you add, and that's basically opening up the ports. Now the next thing I also need to do, I probably want to use custom DNS, right? So what I'm going to do is I need to set up a network rule to allow DNS. I'm going to say, okay, which protocol? I'm going to say the source IP addresses. Again, same subnet. Destination addresses, those are the public DNS servers I'm going to use. And then I say, okay, port 53 for DNS. Add that as a rule. And now I have configured basically my Azure Firewall to basically so the VMs can get access to it. Another thing I need to do, and I mentioned that in the network configuration, I now need to make that VM use those DNS servers, right? I'm not going to change that inside the network properties of the VM. I'm going to basically do that in the virtual network adapter settings in the Azure portal. So I say, okay, you use those custom DNS servers. You can basically also do that and configure that on a subnet and VNet level, so you don't have to do it for every VM, obviously. But in that case, we just do it for the specific VM. And then I connect to the jump server because I cannot access the workload server, so I need to first go to connect to my jump server, which is not like behind the firewall. It's not using the firewall itself. So I log into that. And from there, I'm going to connect to the workload server, which is behind the firewall. Quickly go to work. Yeah. Copy there the private IP address. And connect from there. And now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a quick look at the internet. And as you can see, for example, bing.com. Let's see what happens here. I enter bing.com. And it says, okay, access to bing.com basically blocked, even though Internet Explorer adds a second .com. It doesn't work. It doesn't allow me to connect anything else. But if I go to GitHub, it allows me to basically connect to GitHub. You can see that there is not everything is loaded, so they're using some style sheets, which are using probably some subdomains and things like that. And since I just opened it up for github.com, I really only have access to github.com, right? So very good to basically do that on application layer and allow traffic to specific websites like GitHub, your Azure DevOps, location, or Microsoft Update. Good. So the next thing, or the last thing I want to talk about is the challenges we have software update management. As you all know, updates are important, right? We are fixing bugs, we are fixing software. There is no bug-free software out there, so we need to constantly updating our VMs. Doesn't really matter where they run, if that's on-prem or if that's on a cloud service provider, we need to manage that. The problem with that is often we need to, first of all, check where do I have installed the updates, where I don't. That's something I want to have an overview at. And then I don't want to use multiple update solutions, right? I don't want to have a tool for on-prem. I don't want to have one for Azure and for other cloud service providers. I just want to have one solution where I can see what's going on. And that's where Azure Update Management comes in. So it basically checks the compliance of Windows and Linux computers, both on-prem or in Azure IaaS, and also in other service provider solutions. And then basically, I can also go and deploy and install software updates through that, and I can also automate that and do that in an automated way to deploy that. So what's basically happening here, again, this is a little summary. It works with Windows, Linux, Azure, and other clouds, as well as on-prem. It deploys updates. It can have approval criteria to deploy the updates. You can do that, and we'll show that in a second how that looks like. You get a single pane of glass to basically see all the updates. And then it verifies if the updates were correctly installed and if everything is OK. So again, here are some of the compliance scans. So for Windows, we do that every 12 hours. For Linux, you have basically 3 hours. Or even if you have like the monitoring agent deployed, you have all 15 minutes. And then something also important, you can use your existing sources. So if you would run it from Microsoft Update, that's fine. If you use Windows Update services in Windows Server, you can also use that and leverage that as well. If you're Linux, you can use a public repo or a private repo to get your updates from there. We are supporting a couple of operating systems. To be honest, I always check the docs because the list is always, like with every cloud service, the support list is also changing. But you can see it's not only about Windows, it's really about a couple of Linux operating systems as well. Okay, let's have a quick demo on this and enable update management for some specific VMs. So to do that, it's very simple. So for the first time, I go to Update Management directly on the VM blades. I can configure it directly from there. So it asks me which log analytics workplace I want to use and which automation account. I already have created those. I can also, if I don't have them already, I would need to create them. And then after a while, Update Management is enabled. It does a compliance check, and it tells me, oh, look, on that server, you have those missing updates, right? Let's do that for the other server as well. Again, I'm going to Update Management. I enable that for the VM. Again, now I use the same automation account and same log analytics workspace as before. And again, it takes a couple of minutes, up to 15 minutes, and you can see then where I'm not compliant and which updates are missing. So if I go here after a while, in that update management overview, I see that I have two computers which are not meeting my compliance, right? Which are not compliant with all the updates. I can see which are the missing updates. I can exactly see, okay, maybe some of them has a reason why I didn't install them, right? And then the next thing I can do and configure an update deployment. I want to schedule it and make sure that like my systems are up to date. So I can go and say deploy the missing updates. And then I can have dynamic groups. That's the first thing I can do. So first of all, I can go and say, okay, everything, for example, in that subscription, all the VMs in a specific resource group, for example, those are automatically then added to that update deployment, right? That's one thing I can do. I can also go and say, okay, specific VMs and select them. So I can search for a couple of specific VMs. So I just go in the list of machines. So I go to those two VMs. I can then select those and just like hard select those VMs for the deployment. And again, these are VMs running in Azure. You can also install an agent and use VMs running somewhere else, right? Then I schedule the update with the maintenance window, tell them how long it's going to go. And if it's needed, it can then automatically reboot. I can choose the action. I can always reboot if I want that for some reason, like let's say after every maintenance window or during that update window, I want to do that. And then again, with the magic of video editing, we will go for fast forward, basically, and see that after the next run, we see now all the updates are successfully installed. We can see how long it took, and we can see that we now have two compliant machines here, which have basically all the updates we want installed on that machines, right? So I think that's a very cool tool to keep your things up to date. Something else I want to mention here is it integrates into Azure Stack. So there are pricing differences. If you do that with Azure Virtual Machine, you get a different price when you do that with on-prem or other cloud VMs. But Azure Stack is a little bit different. Since Azure Stack is basically Azure, the VMs from Azure Stack show also up as Azure VMs, right? And you get the same advantages as of Azure VMs as well. So if you're having an Azure Stack or planning to add one, this is a perfect example how you can leverage the Azure services in combination with Azure Stack and combine that. Good, so we are at the end. Again, what did we learn in that session? We had a quick look at Azure Security Center. We had to check out privileged identity management to basically secure your administrator accounts in Azure. We had a quick look at the Azure Firewall and what we can do with it. And we talked about Azure Update Management and how you can update and manage the updates of your virtual machines. So if you want to learn more, there are multiple things. So first of all, I highly recommend that you check out Microsoft Learn. This is our learning platform which helps you guide through different things. For that, you don't even need an Azure account. You don't need to spend your own money. You just go there, you log in with your Microsoft account, it creates you a sandbox, and you basically can go and try out the Azure services. It has guides, how everything is set up, so you can learn. It's a fantastic platform. Also, when you think about doing your certifications, when you start with Azure Fundamentals, admin, developer, whatever, you can select your role and where you are, and basically it recommends you the courses which you should do. There are small courses which go a couple of minutes, and then larger ones which you can spend a couple of hours on. Then I also, again, highly recommend the docs. We have a couple of links to the stuff I talked to, including Security Center, Software Update Management, Just-in-Time VM Access. We also have here a little bit more about Secure Store, Security Center policies, and conditional access management. And then again, you get all those presentations. You have them available online with the list of the demos and walkthroughs, how that works. And again, you get also the slide decks. And then the next sessions, which are all now in that room, in that learning path. So the next one is maintaining your environment. We have a great session on governance in your Azure environment. And then the last session of today, which I also highly recommend you're going to that, is about BCDR. And you can check out what you can do there to make your environment, protect your environment in a hybrid way. Again, the evals, super important. I learned that first day at Microsoft. No, just kidding. But they are super important for us to improve and also learn, and to have a good score to come back again. And then, again, the IT Ops Talk blog, that's where our team is blogging, and where we share content related on IT and Cloud Ops. And then, obviously, my Twitter handle and my blog as well, where you should follow. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.